What's up, guys? I got another game for you. We're playing white against Javanshir, who's 1926. And this game is a very short game. It's a great example of just being extremely lazy and not looking even one move beyond when calculating. And just an example of how easy it is to make mistakes when you play faded chess. So we're white, and we go 1d4. Your opponent plays c6, so it's like it could transpose into different things like the Slav or the caro-kann. A very normal thing to do here would be to go e4 and transpose into a caro-kann. Alternatively, c4, transpose into a Slav. But I'm a weird guy, so I played e3, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but um, I do that sometimes. So he doesn't go d5, he just goes d6, this like perk center type thing. Um, Here again, you can just take the space with c4. Makes a lot of sense. I just developed my knight. Let's turn off the feedback. He goes h6, which looks dumb. Maybe it's not dumb, but it looks dumb. I don't see why he does. I don't get it at all. But whatever. Again here, I feel like I could play c4, but I just go bishop d3 developing. Bishop might belong on e2, but whatever, this is fine. It's not losing. Okay, he goes g5, which explains h6. He wanted to support the pawn. Um, so I guess his whole idea is instead of the regular perk with like a g6, h7, he's doing it one square forward. He'll fianchetto this way, play e5. I don't know, I guess this is an idea. I don't really care if he pushes in this turn because, I mean, I can maybe go forward, back, starting square. I feel like any of these are not bad options, and his pawn will be really extended. So I'm not really worried about him pushing, so I don't actually address the issue. And I noticed he opens this diagonal. So I played b3 so I could put my bishop here and stare down. And he could push if he wants. I'll just jump to one of these squares. So he goes here immediately. I go here. I think a slightly better move is to put your knight on c3 first, because the move order that I did specifically allows a c5 on this move without me taking, because this hangs. Whereas if I put the knight here, oh no, it still hangs. c5. But huh, I don't know. Okay, maybe it's not a huge difference. I went with the bishop first. It seemed more natural to me because the knight wants to go here in a lot of times too, or the knight wants to wait for c4 and then go to c3. So bishop b2 just made more sense to me. But he does play c5. Again, it's pinned. But I ignore it and I go c4. I finally get the space in the center. I'm ready to develop my last piece. My position looks fine. He develops his knight, pressuring this d4 square a third time. And that's another reason why you would want this bishop on e2, is because it actually obstructs the queen's protection of the pawn. So that's helpful to know. Also, these squares are this is kind of available, so it would be nice to have it there. Okay, so in this move I can maybe develop a knight, or maybe a queen, or maybe move the bishop to where it should be. But I saw that, okay, he's eventually going to play g4. He also needs to develop his bishop somewhere. It doesn't have any good squares. This is its good square. Let me play h3 for both these moves. It just seems like a very useful move. prophylaxis. So I do it, and now he pushes. I have to take. He takes. And now this opens up my rook, but it creates a pin that can't be kicked, which is interesting. And so in this position, my knight is pinned, which means it cannot defend the d4 pawn. So he's attacking it 3 times. I'm defending it 3 times, but this guy doesn't really count, so only 2 times. So right now my d pawn might be hanging, so I need to address this. I can either move my bishop like here, unpinning and also adding a protector, the queen. So it's still 3 even if he takes the knight. I just clicked all the wrong squares, but if he takes the knight, you'll still have 1, 2, 3. Another option would be bringing this knight in to support, so that if he takes, you recapture the knight and still have 1, 2, 3. You could do any of those. I got a little cute for whatever reason and went here, which opens up another defender. So it's not a problem if he takes the knight. You could still take back with the bishop. Your bishop would stand nice here. And so I go here. So he takes in the center. And now this knight is an attacker of the center. So before I recapture the center pawn, I throw in this intermezzo check, which removes an attacker from this square. He's forced to recapture because it's check. And now this pawn is hanging. I can't take with the knight because it's pinned. But I can recapture with either of these. I chose the bishop, no specific reason. I just like having a diagonal open. He develops a knight, makes perfect sense. This is still a pin. So I bring the other knight over, which supports it, and now my queen is free to move, which was the idea. But he goes queen a5, which pins the knight, which means my queen, it can move, and if he takes, I take with the g pawn. That's all that means. So in this position, you really just want to address the pin. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can go queen c2 and play a normal position. You can just ignore it and play like rook c1. You can go king f1. All of these moves are playable. And I played the most natural move, the only move that's not playable, but looks the most natural. And so normally when you have this pin and this pin, the way to get out of it the best way is to castle. Because you want to castle anyway. It moves the king, brings the rook, like so many good things. This is unpinned, and then you can move the queen, and your position's great. But in this specific position, castling is actually a big mistake. And the reason is because this position is slightly different than normal. Normally, in these positions where you would castle to get out of the pins, you have a pawn on h2, and your opponent has a pawn on g7. And for the longest time, my brain didn't register that this file is actually open. Because I don't know why, like this is here just looks closed to me. The H file looked open to me, but the G file looked closed to me. So I castle, and right now Black has one opportunity to get a big advantage with queen h5, swinging the queen over, right, double pressuring, and pressuring here. And when I look at that, I think like, okay, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, I can kind of protect the knight. If I take his knight and he can't jump in, then I can even move my queen, and this double pressure is already taken care of. What's the big deal? And the big deal is that he can play, and then after queen h5, rook g8. And this was the move that I didn't really consider. And because this is open, now this pawn is actually no longer, because there's this weird pin on the king, this pawn is really no longer a defender, because once anything takes, the rook would be pinning the pawn. And so then it becomes a huge problem. In 5-10 moves, you're not able to defend this knight, and your king's weak. So castling's a bad move, but that's not so easy to spot. I missed it. My opponent also missed it and played e5. And now I'm sitting at my computer trying to enjoy some casual faded chess. And then I look at this move and I'm like, and I instantly come to the conclusion that I'm lost, that I just immediately lose because it hits a piece, and no matter what I do with the piece, he pushes, and this guy's pinned, and I lose a piece. And I just immediately came to that conclusion um, because I saw this tactic within like half a second once he made the move. And I'm like, okay, it's lost. Um, what's the most productive way to lose a piece here? And the truth is, I'm not lost here. If I had just tried to look for, and I did look, I looked for ways to move the bishop, but they don't do anything. Um, Taking doesn't do anything. You really can't move this because you lose the queen. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna lose, so I guess I'll just leave the bishop and try to make some random productive move on the board. But then it's just completely lost. And I decided to play b4, which is the second best move, but it's a losing move. Whereas the best move is perfectly fine, not losing at all. So basically, if I just drop my bishop back and he pushes the pawn, all I have to do, and this is super obvious, super simple, like 1200, you just take the knight. And now this pawn is undefended. So you got a piece, he gets a piece. You take the pawn, right? So now your knight is fine. He takes your rook. You take his bishop. Now his rook is hanging, so he does something. And at the end of that, white is actually perfectly fine, even though he got the exchange. Um, it was for this bishop and this central pawn and solving your problems. Um, and white's fine there. But because I didn't consider this taking and taking, like I didn't even look at it. It's not like I looked at it, saw he gets a rook and said, I don't, this is bad for me because I'm down in exchange. It's not like I misjudged it like that. I was just lazy and faded, and that's what happens, basically. So this is a very instructive mistake on how not to just automatically assume there's no way out. Because in chess, there's lots of times there are ways out. And so all I had to do was drop back, like simple. That's it. Oh, but what if he pushes? Take the knight. Just a little calculation, and you see that this is actually really good, not really good, but much better for white than what happened. So I went b4, second best move. And the point of this move is not just like, oh, just now we're just going to throw the game. It wasn't like that, even though it looks like that. The idea behind this move, and the reason why it's second best, is the idea was to get him to take, right? It's a tempo move. He has to respond. The idea was to get him to take and then use my pieces somehow, in some way, to activate them by harassing the queen. Because I know I'm going to be down a piece, so I want to get as active as possible. So I want to jettison this pawn, take control of the b file, maybe do something with my queen, and see if I can get any activity, any tricks. Trap is queen, tempo is queen, something like that. And black can maintain an advantage here with queen a3, putting the queen to safety, not making it attackable by my pieces, except by like a knight b1, um, and keeping the threats alive, right? Um, the thing black shouldn't do is take the pawn. He does take the pawn, and this allows me to activate my rook, which isn't the biggest deal, but it's something, right? It's with tempo. So he has to move the queen basically to one of its only remaining squares, queen a5. That's fine. And now in this position, white can maintain equality with Which moves? Which move? Which concept? Which move? That's right. The same exact thing as before. You just drop the bishop back. And if he pushes, same thing. You take, he takes, you take, and now you don't even lose the exchange because your rook isn't there. So, but that wasn't in my mind. I'm still thinking, okay, I'll lose a bishop no matter what. I'm faded. Let's find a cool resource. That's what I'm thinking. And so I played a huge blunder here, but I thought I was losing. And if you don't find this move to retreat the bishop, you are just completely like lost in a huge way. So there are no good moves. But I tried to get as active as possible, line something up. Who knows, right? He does take the bishop, his only winning move. I infiltrate to b7, and I say to myself, okay, maybe he'll go like here or here. But if he castles, I'm just going to resign because even though this pawn is kind of hanging, and this pawn's weak, and this pawn's weak, I'm down an entire piece, and my position's just lost. So this is dumb. And then he does castle, and the game's over. But so I resign, and I lose this game. I just think it's very instructive how you get hit with e5, it was more of a psychological thing than anything. Because objectively, the move doesn't do much after you bring your bishop back. But the psychological effect of, oh, it's hitting a piece and then a pin piece. Oh no, what do I do? You know, that just ruined everything, ruined my game. So, okay, that's an L. It's a very avoidable L. In the future, this move is pretty ridiculous. I'm probably not going to play it. I'll just go c4 or e4. Here, I'll probably just take the space immediately with c4 and then develop to maybe e2 with my bishop. This was fine. This was fine. Yeah, that was weird. I probably should have just moved it back or developed my knight. This is a very interesting concept. I likely won't forget that anytime soon. It's just not common that there's no G pawn. It's usually somewhere, and that makes like an entire world of difference that this rook can't come into play, or it can. So that's that. And then here, um, pay more attention. Okay. All right, short game. Remember, always look for resources, no matter what. Um, Also, if you want a game analyzed, that's at least 10 minutes, minimum. Send me the link, and I'll consider it. Goodbye.